Morning to that riveting news conference by Labor Secretary Alex Acosta, where he repeatedly defends his actions more than a decade ago, where he oversaw a non-prosecution agreement for registered sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Acosta telling reporters Epstein would not have served any time behind bars if his office at the time had not stepped in.
I'm here to say we did what we did because we wanted to see Epstein go to jail. He needed to go to jail.
As part of that 2008 deal, Epstein pleaded guilty to just state charges of soliciting prostitution in Florida in exchange for avoiding federal prison. He was sentenced to just 13 months in a county jail and had to register as a sex offender. As part of that deal, he was able to leave 6 days a week in a private chauffeur for a work release program to his private office. And when reporters pressed Secretary Acosta yesterday about why he agreed to such a deal, Acosta placed blame squarely on local prosecutors in Florida.
The Palm Beach State Attorney's Office was ready to let Epstein walk free. No jail time, nothing. Prosecutors in my former office found this to be completely unacceptable, and they became involved. Our office became involved. Without the work of our prosecutors, Epstein would have gotten away with just that state charge.
In response, the former state's attorney for Palm Beach County at the time of the Epstein plea deal is disputing Acosta's account, saying Acosta could have moved forward with a 53-page indictment that Acosta's own office had drafted. Barry Krishner releasing this statement, saying in part, "I can emphatically say that Mr. Acosta's recollection of this matter is completely wrong. Federal prosecutors do not take a backseat to state prosecutors." Several Democrats are also questioning Acosta's version of events, calling on Acosta to appear at a congressional hearing in 2 weeks. And lawyers for some of Epstein's alleged victims are saying they are not satisfied with Acosta's explanation either. We're going to analyze all of this in a moment. But first, I'd like you to watch how former U.S. Attorney and MSNBC contributor Chuck Rosenberg fact-checks more of Acosta's claims.
The Palm Beach State Attorney's Office was ready to let Epstein walk free. No jail time, nothing.
If Alex Acosta thought that the case was not being properly handled by the state, he had the complete ability to bring charges federally.
These cases are complex, especially when they involve children. Scared and traumatized, refusing to testify.
He had more than 30 minor child victims in this case. Even if a bunch of them didn't want to testify, and I completely understand that, some number would.
Many today question the terms of that ultimatum, what's called the non-prosecution agreement.
If they didn't feel they had the quantum of proof they needed, they simply could have continued the investigation until they did. There was no sort of time stamp on this. There was no urgency to negotiate a non-pros agreement.
Based on the evidence, there was value to getting a guilty plea.
We don't normally, in fact, we don't routinely or almost ever end cases with a non-prosecution agreement. If we don't have a case, we simply don't bring it.
Or we'd roll the dice and bring a federal indictment.
There were thousands of prosecutors and cops and agents around the country making difficult sex crimes cases. The notion that we couldn't bring such a case all the way back in 2007 is deeply wrong and deeply dangerous, and by the way, deeply insulting to the men and women who are doing this kind of work.
Wrong, dangerous, and that's what we heard from Barry Krishner, the former state's attorney, who's saying that is not how it happened. Kurt Bardella, Jason Johnson back with me. Jason, he was up there for an hour. In terms of the White House, it has been reported that White House aides told the president Acosta did a good job, and maybe that's who Acosta was performing for. But all in, did that press conference hurt or help him?
It didn't help Acosta. It didn't help the president. And I want us to step back from the politics for a second and talk about kids. You're talking about children being molested and abused, and the only people who are supposed to defend them are our government, and they failed.
You mean the children who then got categorized as prostitutes?
Exactly, as prostitutes, who were being whisked off to an island. This is disgusting. And one thing I know, I've done interviews with the SELA Foundation for sex trafficking. I have a lot of people who I know who've done this kind of work. pedophiles and child abusers are like roaches. You never find just one, right? They're roaches, they're rats, they're vermin. So the idea that this administration could, under any circumstances, find themselves in a position where not just the president knows people like this, but coddles them and encourages someone like Jim Acosta to say, all right, well, we're going to come up with an explanation for this one way or another is absolutely and morally abysmal. But I guess we shouldn't be surprised that the same administration that can jail children and allow them to die at the border has no problem being associated with people who abuse and molest children and come up with excuses for them to avoid the law.
Let's bring into the conversation Jacqueline Alemany, author of the Washington Post Power Up newsletter. Jackie, a lot of talk about this morning. Yesterday, the news conference was for all to see, but it really, many are saying, was for an audience of one. And here's what Acosta had to say about that.
I am here to talk about this case. I'm doing my job. If at some point the president decides that I am not the best person to do this job, I respect that. That is his choice. I serve at the pleasure of the president. I thought yesterday he was kind and he showed great support.
Kind and great support. Not much talk about support for victims. I didn't hear much yesterday. Jackie, what are people inside the White House telling you?
Yeah, well, I think it's not far-fetched to say that if you have to say out loud on live cable TV during a news conference that you have the support of the president, there's probably a question about whether or not that's true and that you're likely not to maybe have the full support of him. Vice President Mike Pence told reporters right after that conference, he gave him a pretty tepid response saying that everyone serves at the pleasure of the president, a refrain that we've heard time and time again. You know, we've seen all of Trump's embattled cabinet secretaries, from Rex Tillerson to Scott Pruitt, to people like Brett Kavanaugh, Stephen Miller, just administration officials, and people trying out for high-profile Trump administration jobs go on TV and deliver their best performance and their best shot for this president. And it, what I've heard from those in Trump's orbit is that while the president maintains that they're not going to get rid of him, that, it is a bit of too much of a headache and that they're going to stand by him, there were a lot who expressed doubts about Acosta's performance yesterday. He wasn't quite aggressive enough for their liking. He didn't defend the president. He didn't make this about the president, praise the president, sort of change the narrative. He could have easily have thrown in a Bill Clinton dagger there. He did attack the press, but he didn't do it in such a way where he criticized them for trying to tie Trump into this narrative. There were numerous mistakes that Acosta made that those who speak to Trump regularly and around Trump, and those who also worked on the Kavanaugh confirmation hearing, told me that they would have liked to have seen from Acosta during his performance yesterday. But, I think the biggest thing here is this story is not going away, and that is what is most problematic for the labor secretary right now. There is an internal DOJ investigation into whether or not Acosta violated the Crime Victim Rights Act. A federal judge ruled that him and his team of prosecutors did violate the law by not notifying victims of whether or not of the plea bargain back in February. Now the DOJ is looking into that. And so as long as that investigation is going on, this is going to be hanging over his head and a topic of conversation, along with if additional victims are coming forward with these really heart-wrenching, pretty terrible and gruesome interviews like the one we saw on your network. That is also going to continue to bring Acosta into this news cycle and make the Trump administration and the president look like they're defending a person who went easy on a serial child abuser.
Yes, a high school girl who was recruited to become one of Epstein's girls. Kurt, Secretary Acosta kept saying over and over that we live in a different time now compared to when he oversaw the Epstein deal over a decade ago. Please watch this.
We now have 12 years of knowledge and hindsight, and we live in a very different world. Today's world treats victims very, very differently. Today's world does not allow some of the victim shaming that could have taken place at trial 12 years ago.
We live in a very different world. We're not talking about corporate culture and what went down at an office Christmas party in 1988 isn't cool in 2019. We're talking about the recruiting, the molesting, and possibly the rape of minors. What do you make of this response, Kurt?
I don't know what world he's talking about where it was ever okay or acceptable to rape children. That's what's happening here. And the idea that there's a time differential that explains why he went easy on Epstein is ridiculous. It's absurd. And any time that you have a press conference like he had, and we're all left with more questions, we're all left with more people coming forward saying, you know what, that's not what happened. Your recollection of this is completely wrong. There are more people coming forward now, adding more context to this, and it just ensures that the story continues. And if there was one goal that Epstein had yesterday in terms of the eyes of the president in keeping his job—
Acosta, you mean, not Epstein.
Acosta, it was to end the question, to end the narrative, to try to see a conclusion to all of this, and you just guarantee that it's going to extend. And that's all the more reason why Congress and the Oversight Committee has said that in 2 weeks they're going to have a hearing. They've invited him to attend the Secretary and answer questions about why he made the decisions he made back then, and to relitigate this whole thing in the public eye. The next question really that the White House and Acosta is going to have to answer is, are they going to accept that invitation to appear before Congress or not?
Okay, and if we look at what the White House has done historically, or even in the last month, they take congressional requests and subpoenas and blow their nose with them.
Right, exactly.
So do you believe, Jason, that we're going to see Acosta appear?
No, he's not going to appear publicly. He's not going to appear privately. Look, you've had congressional committees ask for all sorts of people, and they basically say no. Hope Hicks decides, oh, I'm going to take some photos, and I might talk to you possibly occasionally. I'll slip you some notes in the DM. They don't listen, and they don't care. And I think what's—
And they're allowed to not care, though, Jason.
They're allowed to not care, but they're only allowed to not care because the public doesn't scream and yell and demand greater moral accountability from this administration. And that's the problem. Look, I can look at my own life. I know maybe a couple people who've been to jail, a couple of people who've been DUIs. I don't know pedophiles. And this administration is full of people and presidents who know pedophiles and wife abusers. When is that going to become too much for this country? When are the Republicans going to say, you know what, this is a bridge too far? Because at this point, it is abundantly clear that there's almost a war on young people, a war on women, a war on children, that this administration engages in policy and ambivalence, and we should be disgusted as a country.
All right, around the horn quickly. Will Acosta be keeping his job? When we are talking 1 month from now, will Acosta be the labor secretary? Jackie.
There are clearly holes in his story, as evidenced yesterday and from the intrepid reporting of Julie Brown at the Miami Herald. The predictions that I got from my sources in and outside of the White House are he's going to have to resign.
Kurt?
You know, here's where I'll take a different take than Jason on this. I think that it's possible that Trump orders Acosta to appear before the committee to try to save his job, and I don't think he'll be successful.
You think, hold on one more time, you think Trump is going to order Acosta to appear, even though Trump knew Epstein at the time? And I'm not saying that the president is guilty of anything, but this is not a story that he can completely disassociate himself from, right? There were examples, you know, the former head of the EPA, Scott Pruitt, he could let Pruitt dangle because it didn't touch Trump. This one does.
And I think that we're seeing this death by 1,000 cuts with more victims coming forward, more prosecutors coming forward. And I think as the story continues and isn't put to bed, Trump's going to get continually upset, and he's going to go to Acosta and say, you can either resign right now or try to save your job, just as the way that Brett Kavanaugh really saved his position, his nomination, through his confirmation hearing.
Okay, 4 weeks from now, does Acosta have his job, Jason?
Of course he's going to have his job. I don't think this administration has that kind of backbone. If he finally steps down, it's because Acosta finds it difficult to do his job, not because he lacks support. This is an administration supported Roy Moore. This administration supported tons of people with allegations. I don't think Trump will force him out. He may eventually drop out on his own.
All right. Jackie, the grand dame of Power Up from the Washington Post, thank you for joining us. Kurt, Jason,
Thanks,
stick
Stephanie.
around. We've got more to cover. Coming up,